Hello and welcome to Grody UnPrOfEsSiOnAL. My name is Justin McMenamy, and my mission is to share both profitable and painful leadership lessons acquired over a 20-year career as a misfit in corporate America. In this episode, we discuss just how unfortunate it is that modern American aristocrats are often rewarded for years of inept leadership with golden parachutes to gently float them into luxurious retirement. Maybe we should consider other means, perhaps like the French revolutionaries of the late 18th century. Those guys knew how aristocrats should head off into retirement. The bitter old engineer, the bitter old salesman, the bitter old professor. No matter your profession, I'm guessing at the mention of bitterness, someone pops into your mind. The person who has seen too many things. The person who has been burned too many times. The person who has seen one too many lies across their career. They are cynical and overly critical. They assume ulterior motives exist underneath every interaction, and they assume everyone is out to take advantage of them. Do you have a person in mind? Do you know the type of person that I'm talking about? They are the ones that no matter the topic, they know the story behind the story. In every story they tell, they are simultaneously the smartest person and the victim. Have you ever pondered what happened to make them like this? From the outside, it seems like a miserable existence. Why would someone choose to be like that? This is my story of tasting and nearly becoming addicted to the fermented fruit of bitterness. I began my career as a design engineer within a large organization serving the diesel engine industry. The diesel engine industry is old, entrenched, and highly regulated. Fun fact, more effort, time, and money has been spent optimizing the combustion engine than any other machine in human history. Despite that, a big part of the recruiting pitch which drew me and others to the company was the epic technical challenges which faced the organization as antiquated engine designs needed to be refactored in pursuit of improved environmental cleanliness. The field is wide open for innovation, for ideation, and for creative solutions, hiring managers told us. The thing I know now and wish I knew then is that companies associated with highly regulated, capital-intensive markets with high barriers to entry for emerging competitors often grow complacent and stale over time. Industries like automotive, airline, banking, aerospace, and steel can go decades without facing emerging competition and are therefore able to quietly and steadily decay in place. This quiet corporate rot is marked by years of leadership inbreeding, manifest into severe risk aversion and extreme process orientation. Upon joining, I quickly experienced the aristocratic leadership styles so common in the final chapters of formerly vibrant companies. The term aristocratic leadership is coined by Lawrence Miller in the book Barbarians to Bureaucrats. The aristocrat is the final leadership form an organization attains prior to collapse or invasion. These are leaders marked by their inability and unwillingness to lead, to create vision, or to create purpose or unity. These are leaders almost singularly focused on their own egotistical self-interests, eschewing the interest of shareholders or employees. The aristocrat leader is marked with unabashed egotism and an absence of empathy. Aristocratic leaders weaponize fear in pursuit of conformance. They seek to remove all initiative and risk-taking across the organization. This is a class of leadership which has never created, nor do they feel the burden to do so. They arrogantly and blindly sit on the successes, products, and profits built by the previous generations. They operate on borrowed legitimacy and seek to extend their self-seeking reign through manipulation and idea suppression. No more than 6 months after joining the company, I knew something was amiss. I wouldn't have been able to give the feeling a name, but I had unwittingly joined a textbook aristocratic organization, a division led by an old boys club, which ruled by fear and intimidation. This was an organization that finished morning stand-up meetings with the send-off. Remember, period cost walks on 2 legs. Leaders thought of themselves and behaved as predators, while staff were considered prey. The phrase, "The ocean is filled with sharks and minnows. If you're not a shark, then you're lunch," was regularly quoted by leaders in front of staff. It was the duty and the pleasure of leadership to root out laziness and to employ negative psychology tactics in pursuit of manipulating greater effort from staff. Through the lens of experience, the signs were obvious. This was an organization in the final chapter of the corporate life cycle. All creativity, charisma, and collaboration had long since left the room, leaving only those willing to use their leverage to manipulate others and those willing to be manipulated because the pay was good. The mental strain inflicted on employees by the aristocracy was staggering. In situ, I was able to see the effects on other people, but hoped it wouldn't affect me. In my first year at the company, I became friends with a cubemate. He was about 15 years older than me, and I grew to look up to him. He had the life that I roughly envisioned for myself. He was married, had a couple of kids, some nice cars, a house with a little land, and hobbies like woodworking and putzing around on his tractor in his backyard. Over Christmas and New Year's, he was out of the office for an extended period. When he returned, I asked him, "How was your time away?" He replied flatly that he had spent his break in the hospital. He had had a breakdown and thought it best to spend time under medical supervision to help him piece himself back together. Work was too much. The pressure was too much. The pace was too much. The demands were too much. This was a massive wake-up call. In the first year of your career, when the person that you are professionally aspiring to become tells you that there are massive potholes farther down the career path, it causes you to take pause, to consider just how quickly do I want to speed towards the horizon. This was not an isolated event. A decade later, after announcing my departure, I was astounded and saddened by the number of people that came to me in confidence, telling me they wished they had the courage to leave the company and bet on themselves. Many of them would finish the story by saying they had sought numerous forms of medical assistance as a means of navigating the mental strain of working in this hostile environment. Unfortunately, that isn't the end of the examples. About a year after I left the company, a former supervisor who had been struggling for years elected to take his own life. Still one of the saddest days of my professional career. I share these stories as a backdrop. This was an environment in which those in charge lacked any talent for leadership, took pride in hazing and abusing staff, unleashed sarcasm onto young engineers, and verbally assaulted people to their face and behind their back. To quote Thomas Jefferson, this was a breed of leader who fears and distrusts people, who seeks to draw all power from the people into the hands of a higher class. I think most would agree that long-term exposure to this amount of inept leadership provides fertile ground for bitterness. In hindsight, it is easier for me to see signs that I was not immune to the effects of this leadership style. In the season, I knew the risk was there and was hoping to mitigate their effects by employing a defensive strategy. 6 years into my career, I was, for the most part, a nobody within the organization, and I wasn't opposed to it staying that way. While friends of mine were seeking opportunities to climb the corporate ladder, I was largely looking to stay off the radar. I had received above-average performance ratings during my first years and had several managers encouraging me to pursue the fast track. But I had wisely, I thought, elected to stick to the fringes of the organization. Wherever political infighting and bullying was taking place, I typically moved in the opposite direction. This strategy was blown out of the water by a chain reaction which started innocently and ended with me lying in the hospital, suffering from chest pains caused in large part by anxiety triggered by a bitterness addiction. I remember the first domino meeting like it was yesterday. It's one of those events that when it's happening, nothing seems out of the ordinary. But years later, you realize that is where the first domino tipped, starting a chain reaction which could not be stopped. To this day, I wish I wouldn't have touched the first domino. I wish I wouldn't have said anything. During a regularly scheduled meeting, the department head began sharing frustration with the antiquated and disconnected engineering systems used during the design process. The frustration was that for each new engine program, there were long periods of engineering design work in which the business was blind to the estimated cost roll-up of the project. This would result in custom design work being requested by the vehicle teams, which later proved to be too costly to implement, considering the financial cost targets of the project. He desired for there to be a system which would provide cost visibility during the design phase of the project. Having spent years working amongst the disjointed systems, I knew his request was achievable. I raised my hand, somewhat out of character, and said, "That can be done." And with that, the first domino tipped. I was immediately assigned leadership of the project, which at the surface was tasked with establishing bridges between disconnected data streams of engineering and purchasing data. In the following weeks, as we laid out the groundwork for the project, it became clear this project would be far more challenging politically than technically. The data pools resided in a half a dozen different fiefdoms, therefore requiring buy-in from each representative department head. Each head requiring assurance that this project in no way placed them or their kingdom at risk. For those that haven't lived amongst aristocrats, attaining organizational buy-in consists of dozens of hallway conversations, prep meetings, one-on-one meetings, and follow-up meetings, all properly sequenced such that each leader is brought on board in the proper hierarchical order. The logical argument that we continually repeated throughout the project was that no new data privileges were being extended to anyone. We were simply taking data from multiple sources and presenting it in a consolidated and actionable manner. allowing employees designing engines to make informed decisions earlier in the development process. To any functioning leadership team, that would be enough to explain the benefits of what we were doing. But as we remember, aristocrats fear and distrust employees. Seriously, this all seems so obvious in hindsight. 4 months into the grind, I was informed that our project had attracted the attention of the business unit vice president. He requested a 15-minute status update during an upcoming staff meeting. I know what I'm about to say does not sound possible, but I assure you, in an aristocracy, this is not only possible, but probable. Across the business unit, almost no one knew what the vice president looked like. He had never hosted an all-employee meeting and had never been seen in the halls. Sure, there were rumors about what it was like in the throne room, but no one knew anybody that had ever been there. Heading into the meeting, we had secured the necessary political alliances. In accordance with the teaching, you never head into a meeting without already knowing the outcome. As I walked into the dark paneled conference room, the 12 department heads were already seated along both sides of the long conference table. The VP was seated at the far end at the head of the table. Midway down the right side, I took the only open seat near the projector, leaving my division manager, an only assured ally in the room, to sit back from the table against the wall in a spare chair. The chessboard was set. All told, I was in a room with a dozen executives, the most junior being 9 pay grades higher than I, but nothing to worry about. 3 slides, a well-rehearsed demo, maybe 1 or 2 softball questions from our side of the aisle, and we would be in and out in 15 minutes. I had been assured that sailing through would be impossible. The VP always dings people for something, but for the most part, serious objections would be raised after I had left the room. I had been told, this is a development opportunity. This gives you much needed visibility as a prerequisite for you moving up in the organization. I had been coached, just stick to the script. And if he asks questions, let the executives answer. Don't make any commitments. Just stick to the script. For at least 3 minutes, everything went according to plan. Somewhere in the 4th minute, however, and without warning, the VP exploded. He instantly deduced a byproduct of the project that each of the department heads had overlooked for months. He surmised immediately that the bonus structure of the whole business unit would be put at risk if this project proceeded. And there is no quicker method of igniting an aristocrat than putting their bonus at risk. I later learned the business unit's bonus was built upon phantom profit, generated by marking up the engines that were transferred to other departments in the company. By consolidating the disparate data streams into an actionable summary, this project placed a spotlight on the otherwise cloaked interdepartmental markup. Once exposed, this would empower internal customers to, quote, squeeze our nuts, and in turn, ruin the business unit's bonus. I say that I later learned this because the moment he recognized this, he moved immediately, without explanation, to destroy the messenger. Over the next 5 minutes, he unleashed a string of profanity-laced threats directly aimed at me. With his finger wagging in the air, he threatened to destroy my career. And at one point, threatened to remove one particularly sensitive part of my body and insert it forcefully into another part of my body. In the chaos, our previously secured political coalition evaporated. I watched 12 department heads slowly turn their backs to the vice president and stare blankly into the abyss. They each ran for their own mental bunker, leaving me fully exposed in a Category 5 hurricane. The moment is frozen in time. I am sitting midway down the right side of the conference table. I am looking up the table towards the vice president, backlit by the only windows in the room as he breathes fire. To his left is my division manager, the only remaining ally in the room, and blankly looking away from the vice president at the projected image of my presentation are each of the department heads sitting in awkward silence. It was the scene from Ocean's 11 where Andy Garcia's character demolishes Elliot Gould's former casino. As the crowd turns to see the implosion, Elliot Gould remains locked onto Andy Garcia as Andy throws the plunger. About halfway into the tirade, my division manager attempted to defuse the situation, or at least draw fire. He was told in no uncertain terms his input was not appreciated, and if he chose to speak once more, he would find himself immediately unemployed. He elected to return to his mental bunker. Walking out of the meeting, I was in shock. Over almost 6 years in the division, I had seen each of those dozen cowering managers lead through intimidation, attack, and public embarrassment. In my youthful naivete, I had always assumed that somewhere up above the division managers was a leader that just didn't know what was happening in the departments. When I filled out the employee opinion survey each year, I assumed there was an uninformed executive or HR professional that just needed to be aware of the reality so they could come and investigate. That assumption, along with my project, were incinerated that day as I watched men and women that regularly ruled with an iron fist cower like dogs. You come to realize these department heads, they're not successful leaders. They aren't thoughtful in their approach. They're henchmen. They had not been selected despite their abusiveness. They had been selected because of their abusiveness. This event, in concert with the integral sum of my previous experiences, sent me spiraling. I had been burning the candle from both ends for months to get the project to a presentable state. And right as I approached what was supposed to be a checkpoint in the race, leadership walked out onto the course and delivered a swift kick between the knees. More than at any point in my career, I could have used a mentor. I could have used someone to reframe the situation, to explain the dynamics at play. I could have used someone to tell me to dust off my sandals and leave that place. I could have used someone to confidently tell me these are undiscerning aristocratic idiots that have and will continue to single-handedly destroy 60 years of market leadership and billions of dollars of market valuation. They care nothing for customers. They care nothing for employees. They care nothing for shareholders outside of their own stock options. You are made for more. Pack up your bags and don't look back. But I didn't have that. I'm not complaining. I'm just saying at that stage in my career, I did not have a mentor to describe the situation from outside of the situation. So I spiraled. I wallowed. I gossiped. I told the story to anyone that would listen. I told the story in part out of anger, in part out of seeking a logical explanation, and in part seeking sympathy, hoping that by telling the story, I could move forward. 6 months after that fateful meeting, I still had not pulled out of my funk. My year-end rating conversation with the department head that had tried briefly to intervene was a single sentence. Get your head out of your butt. I'm lowering your rating because you won't put this behind you. Over the next year, I continued to struggle, still not knowing how to process the situation. I continued to tell the story. Each time, at one level, I would feel a tiny bit better. But at another, deeper level, I would feel worse. It wasn't until years later that I learned that reliving emotionally difficult events adds to the trauma inflicted by the event. I was walking headlong into bitterness. Not because I wanted to grow up to be a bitter old engineer, but because I knew no other path out of the quicksand which I found myself in. That meeting and the events surrounding it mark a crazy season in my career and in my life. I don't bring it up as a means of outing anyone, nor for the purpose of seeking sympathy for something that happened over 15 years ago. I bring it up in hopes of mentoring. I bring it up to be a guide to others suffering in the same desert, to be a voice of experience for those tempted towards bitterness as they try to process crazy events occurring in highly dysfunctional places by incompetent people. I want to share a few leadership lessons acquired while working inside of this organization. First, ask yourself if the ladder you are climbing heads to a destination worth pursuing. Are you in an organization that you want to be higher in? Do leaders 2 and 3 levels above demonstrate traits worth emulating? Do they have principles and values which you respect? If not, today is the right day to consider a change. Most organizations end up with a narrow set of personalities and predispositions within the leadership ranks. The reason for this is explained simply as like promotes like. If an organization takes on a rambunctious, risk-taking, irreverent personality, it is most likely that those who demonstrate the same personality traits will be deemed worthy of promotion to leadership. An aristocratic executive that loathes free thinking and values the motivational aspects of public flogging is most likely to promote dim-witted henchmen all too willing to mindlessly follow orders. It was naive of me to think the leadership issues that I experienced were local to my department. Had I considered earlier that the division managers were hired because of their brutality rather than in spite of their brutality, I would have been much quicker to exit. What about good leaders distributed across a bad organization? To be clear, there are good leaders inside of bad organizations. My stay at this company was extended in large thanks to a few really good leaders. But it must be noted that a countercultural leader is an unstable arrangement and should be treated as temporary when you consider your own personal career plans. Second, as hard as it may be, try to move beyond the first-person perspective as you attempt to assess the present situation or process experiences after the fact. extradite yourself from the storyline and view the situation as a third-party observer. For many years, I analyzed and reanalyzed the decades spent at this company. Replaying the tape of that fateful day with me at the conference room table pushed me toward anger and tempted me to bitterness. The question, why did that happen to me, is an emotionally charged question. If, rather, I replay the sequence with a generic staff engineer sitting at the table, attempting in good faith to help the organization overcome data compatibility issues, my focus of the inquiry changes. I'm now more likely to ponder what type of morally depraved derelict treats their staff like that. Okay, maybe I haven't gotten all of the emotional ingredients out just yet. The line of questioning should focus more on analyzing the incompetence of leadership than the psychological impact of their actions. I place myself in the role of their boss, considering whether they should be allowed to retain their employment, rather than the target of their ineptitude. Let's not forget that every employee in an at-will society has the right to fire their boss, simply by not coming to work anymore. Eleanor Roosevelt is quoted as saying, "Learn from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself." No matter if you are presently a leader or not, you can learn about leadership by simply watching and analyzing the situations that take place across your organization. By observing and analyzing others' leadership practices and resulting outcomes, you can begin your leadership education very early in your career, giving you a generational lead over those that wait until they are in leadership to start the process of learning how to motivate and inspire others to a common objective. Like watching game film, attempt to understand the whys, the motivations, and the mindsets of the various players across your organization. Seek to analyze the actions and inactions of leaders and the resulting effectiveness of their approach. How is it that an organization can spend $286 million on a development project that results in a product pulled from the market after 6 months due to lack of customers coupled with significant technical flaws? How is it that leadership can steer an organization from decades of preeminent market leadership into a market exit in under 3 years? Blind, aristocratic arrogance is the answer to both. It bears repeating, those questions are very different than, why did my boss change data on my design review slides in order to support his professional self-serving interests? In that question, I am the victim. The question leads to bitterness. If instead I ask, would I fire an employee that changes data in support of self-serving interests? The answer and the needed action on your part are much clearer. And finally, bitterness. I am not a psychologist, and please don't take the next paragraph as proven medical advice. In my experience, bitterness was the fermented cocktail of innocence stolen, advantage taken, expectations not met, relationships not reciprocated, words not kept, and grace not extended. The ingredients are added in real time, but fermentation occurs over months and years of replaying and retelling the story. In pain and anger, I sought relief wherever I could get it, by telling my story to anyone that would listen. The act of telling the story provided a few seconds of relief, but only added to the long arc of pain as I relived the event with each retelling. Over the course of the next few years, I felt myself changing. I felt my outlook on life changing and my personality changing, and not into someone I wanted to be, not someone I enjoyed being. The painful lesson for me along this journey is bitterness only hurts the holder. It is only a liability. It doesn't enact revenge. It doesn't elicit regret from the perpetrator. Bitterness is like a tree. It can start out small, but if you water it, if you fertilize it, it will grow to the point that it is nearly impossible to remove. Once I realized this, I had to act. Even though there weren't quick fixes, I had to do something to stem the unwanted evolution of my personality, of my outlook. First, I stopped telling the story. Second, I left the environment. By the grace of God, the job I ended up moving into turned out to be an amazing role. However, at the time of the change, I wasn't searching for better pay. I was simply turning the page as quickly as I could. Third, I read. This will play out differently for each person, but I was relieved to read of others having experienced nearly identical situations under similar leadership styles within organizations in the final years of their existence. I was relieved to see that this is part of the natural stagnation and decay of once creative and even innovative organizations like Bethlehem Steel, Chrysler, Boeing, and General Electric. Though history may not repeat itself, Mark Twain says, it does rhyme. Knowing the pattern gave me solace that these people, they weren't picking on me specifically. They were merely the half-witted final chapter of 60 years of success. Knowing the pattern also gave me greater confidence that I could recognize and avoid future interactions with similar corporate cultures. This allowed me to fourth, conclude that these leaders were incompetent infants, somehow given control of $1 billion business unit. I wasn't the broken one. They were. It's important to point out that many of the ingredients of bitterness and deliverance are the same. In both recipes, you conclude that the other party is wrong. You conclude that you understand the situation better than they. For me, the difference was taking the action of leaving on my own terms, asserting my will into the relationship, rather than letting them set the pace and pattern of the final chapter. I also cannot stress enough the need to remove yourself, your feelings, your lived experience from the inevitable mental replaying of the story. By analyzing the game film for the purpose of learning what not to do rather than how it made me feel, I was no longer trapped by the experience. One final note. I have many friends that didn't leave. Friends with different experience sets and different outlooks on life that weren't tempted to the addiction of bitterness. They were able to coexist within an aristocratic culture in a healthy way, providing a remnant in the organization that stands for what is right, right for the customer and right for the employee. I salute them. I don't want to convey in this episode, either verbally or non-verbally, that the only solution is to exit. For me and for mine, it was the right thing. I am thankful for those that are able to stay and work towards reformation. For those that wish to share comments, praises, large sums of money, or to share your antidotes to bitterness, you can reach me at justin@grody.io. I would say for the aristocrats with complaints, concerns, frustrations, or accusations, you can reach me at the Yacht Club. But who are we kidding? I don't go to yacht clubs, and aristocrats don't listen to podcasts called Grody and Unprofessional. Thanks for your time. Let's do this again soon.